Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carpo, and this video is going to be more or less aimed at exposing the bullshit of psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry, but I'm generally not trying to cover every base here, and so I should give kind of a little preamble as to my intention here. I'm in the process of making, I've mentioned this before, I'm in the process of writing a documentary that I'm eventually going to do my best to edit and put on YouTube as a documentary about, you know, basically the pharmaceutical industry up till now. And it's not something that I want to, you know, a lot of folks get into something. I'm the kind of person who wants to research and put something out right away. But in this case, I decided to kind of hang on a little bit. I wanted to make sure that I've included everything. So today I was going to come out and talk about advertising here, and before, for some reason, as I was taking notes and adding to my farm, I was going to start reading it aloud, and then I got stuck watching another documentary, and so anyhow I figured I wanted to cover a few bases here as some of the important issues that I've come across. And first off, psychiatry itself is a joke. There is no scientific evidence to show that there is anything such as a disorder, such as what they might call a chemical imbalance. These ideas have been proposed for decades. There have been dozens of, you know, antipsychotics produced, you know, all the way back from Thorazine and Milltown. Valium created, you know, in the 70s, which became Mother's Little Helper. These things were promoted as a way to get away from basically life. And over time it got worse and worse to the point where today they are prescribing these things to children. And that's what I wanted to mainly talk about. Psychiatry uses a diagnostics manual called the DSM. And for those who aren't aware, the first edition came out in the 50s, and I think they're on the DSM-4 now, or the 5, I'm not sure. But you might wonder, how do they determine which psychiatric conditions are illnesses or a mental illness, and how do you put it into this manual? You might think that there's some sort of blood tests or scientific things that they do to figure it out. No. There's a room full of men who meet up, and a couple dozen guys say yay or nay, should this be a disease? It's really that simple. It's not a complex issue where, you know, these things are like, you know, set in stone. And what they've done over the reason why this has been revealed is so clearly, you know, the idea that it's money over reality, over, you know, profits over people, is there have been up to a 4,000 time increase in prescriptions for certain medications, and especially for children. If an adult wants to make the decision to take an antipsychotic, if an adult wants to take Valium their whole life, if an adult wants to take anything, then they would be a fool not to research it. But for a child, but that's still their choice as an adult. For a child, they don't have that choice. And so, if anything, this is aimed at the parents out there who might think that medicating your child with Ritalin is a good thing, because it's absolutely not. Children go through all different types of issues in their lives, just like adults, but they are more predisposed to have, you know, emotional fallouts and outbursts and ups and downs. You can't look at that as a mental illness. And so, I'd like to get it out of the way to say there are certain conditions which warrant these antipsychotic medications. There are certain people who do benefit. The question is the long-term damage worth it for the majority of the people who are taking it not needing it? For example, if you're grieving over the death of a loved one, a lost loved one, or perhaps you've moved to a new location and you're a little stressed out, doesn't mean you have to take benzodiazepines or antidepressants. Antidepressants have been shown to be no better than placebo, and that's a fact. In fact, most of the trials that are done on antidepressants are 4 to 8 weeks long. And I've heard plenty of stories of people who say it takes them twice that long to get off of these drugs. In fact, some of the side effects from these drugs, even after you quit, you can have withdrawals for up to a year before your brain chemistry gets back to normal. And it's worse than the opiate epidemic by far. The antipsychotic epidemic. Everyone's talking about OxyContin and the Purdue family and how corrupted pharmaceuticals are for prescribing all these opioids, and then there's another group of people saying, hey, now they're under-prescribing opioids because they're trying to fight back, and that's a completely separate issue. But antipsychotics are something different. These aren't prescribed for pain. These are prescribed by doctors who are convincing the people that you have a condition that you could benefit from this. And we've got, you know, ADHD and ADD meds which have been proven to actually shrink the brain, and these are being given to children, you know, shrink parts of the frontal cortex. So one of the worst offenders is these groups like Teen Screen, where they go to high schools or colleges and ask kids, hey, have you ever felt like an outcast? Do you ever feel a little sad or depressed? Do you feel anxious? And if so, then of course they try to get them on psychotics. At least a quarter of them are prescribed. In fact, if you go to see a psychiatrist, I believe well over 90% of people to see a psychiatrist are instantly prescribed medication. It's the first line of defense, rather than something like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which could also be just summed up as talking with people, you know? And no, we want to throw a drug at it. Interesting article I read said that recent research showed that CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, talking with people, is more effective not just than drugs, the drugs they're giving, but it's more effective than CBT plus the drugs. In other words, CBT works better alone than combining it with these antipsychotics or antidepressants. Because what you're doing is you're masking an emotion that otherwise you need to overcome. So you can continue taking these antidepressants for years for a condition you may have resolved in a couple of weeks. Maybe you were just feeling down. Maybe you just had a bad moment. And look, I'm speaking not out of ignorance, but I'm a guy who's had depression, anxiety. I've had moments in my life where shit has happened and really gone downhill fast, and I felt like complete shit. But I always spring back from it. And I don't have to numb my emotions completely to feel that way. And a person who knows me may say, but you smoke pot, you know, or you take kratom. One interesting thing about street drugs versus, say, or taking, you know, recreational drugs versus taking some of these antipsychotics or antidepressants is that these drugs are claimed to take up to weeks to take effect. And on top of that, you can barely tell if they're working or not. But the interesting thing is the half-life. They remain in your system for a long time. And that's a major consideration. Because while you may be able to have a drink and be back to normal in a couple hours, or smoke a bowl and be back to normal in a few hours, if you take some of these antipsychotics, you might be, you know, out of your mind for hours, if not a whole day. Especially some of the amphetamines that are being prescribed to kids, like Ritalin. And I'm not saying that some can't benefit, but the overwhelming majority of people who are taking these probably do not need them. Placebo. You may hear about placebo effect. Well, when they're doing trials, they will have, you know, an equal amount of people taking the drug and this amount of people taking placebo. Well, what I found out is that when some of the placebo people claim that the drug's working, they will actually eliminate those people from the group because they say, well, we're looking for the effect of the drug. This is an easy way for them to skew the results and make it look like that their test passed and that it was a benefit. More than that, they can ignore any studies that they don't want. They can do 1,000 studies on a drug and just choose one of those studies out of all those 1,000 studies, and you know that's just how the system works. And the thing you'll see on the bottle of most of these antipsychotics, antidepressants, anxiolytics, you know, if you really look closely at the side effects and the efficacy of it, it will say mechanism of action is unknown. In other words, we don't know how these things work. And so, at this point, somebody might say, well, maybe it does work for some people, and maybe it is placebo, but hey, who cares? Everyone should care, because the side effects, the damage to the liver, to the brain. In fact, some of the Parkinson's patients now, they're starting to suspect that many of the Parkinson's patients may have taken some of these early antipsychotics back in the 50s and 60s, which would make complete sense. They're at that age where, you know, if they were taking some of these early, you know, pharmaceuticals, it may have affected them negatively. That, you know, things like loperamide or, there's like Miltown or Thorazine have been known to affect, you know, we do know that we have dopamine and serotonin, but we don't know how these interact. We don't know what the levels are in the brain, so there's no way to really test it. So if someone says, "Oh, your neurochemistry, your levels are out of balance," it's complete bullshit, you know. And I'm bought into a lot of this. In fact, I've always known the pharmaceutical industry was, you know, full of shit. I really didn't know that psychiatry itself had absolutely no scientific evidence behind it. None of these medications have real science behind them. None of the studies on neurochemistry or, you know, low dopamine or low serotonin, none of them have any proof whatsoever. They're completely fabricated. And these people are really good at marketing to us. So we've got, they will take suicidal thoughts and turn it into, you know, negative feelings of impending doom and, you know, make it, you know, pretty it up. But the thing is, suicide rates are higher. In fact, one thing I found out that kind of blew my mind is that, you know, they make it seem like teens are suicidal. They said that the teenage suicide rate is actually 11 in 100,000. But among users of Prozac, some of these antidepressants, moves from 11 to 718 out of 100,000. It's like a 65-time increase. That should ring alarm bells, but it doesn't matter. When it comes to lawsuits, these companies have enough money set aside. It's on reserve just to buy their way out of it. They know they're going to get lawsuits. In fact, I found out that there is a lawsuit, a pharmaceutical lawsuit regarding, you know, psychotic medicine or, you know, psychiatric medicine every hour. More than that. There's 34 every day. And these people just shell out billions of dollars to shut people up. And there's no way to stop it. It's a machine. And things like Paxil, Prozac, and the idea that you need a mood stabilizer, think about this. Do you really need to stabilize your mood? Or maybe you're having mood swings because you're having issues in your life, or something you need to resolve. And like I said, some people, there are a few people who have serious mood issues that can benefit, but is there an underlying physical condition that may be causing this, or is it something that can be resolved on its own without taking a lifetime of these drugs? And that's often what they say. Go to the psychiatrist, they say, oh, you have schizophrenia, you're going to be taking this for the rest of your life. And the cash keeps rolling in, you know. And drugs like Xanax, I believe it costs like a penny and a half or 2 cents to produce 1,000 of them. Yet, you know, the amount they charge insurance companies and the individuals is just astronomical. And whenever a generic comes out, these companies can stop the generics from producing their drug by coming out with a new version of the drug or a new use for a drug that already exists, and then that stops this company from producing it. It's a big game at the cost of the individual. And why it pisses me off is because these drugs, these inventions and creations and molecules, we all own them. They have been developed by generation upon generation of, you know, our ancestors, which all work together for the betterment of mankind to understand things. And now that's a profit machine that is fucking with the health of every individual. It's bad enough that they profit off of, you know, life-saving drugs, which is a huge issue. But when they're creating diseases that don't exist to make more profit, that's when we really need to be alarmed. So there's a revolving door. People in the FDA, we all hate the FDA. We know that, you know, somebody comes into the FDA and they have vested interest in a drug company, and the revolving door is once people leave the FDA, they usually become lobbyists for the drug companies that, you know, were asking for their very approval on these drugs, and they continually get it. I consider a lot of these people to be the leeches of society and some of the worst bottom feeders that there are. You know, you can wear a suit and a tie and have millions of dollars and be a complete shitbag, even if you're creating something that is helping people. If you're doing it merely, not just for profit, because profit is an incentive, and there's nothing wrong with a capitalist mentality. If you want to invent a life-saving drug and then profit from it, so be it. But when you stop other companies from producing a similar drug, or you're charging people $1,000 per dose and people are dying because of it, and you can't justify that with the cost of producing the drug, which they never can, you know, where does that leave us? I think it was Paxil that they said has 2,497 potential side effects. And I thought, wow, you know, of course that's an extreme number. I can't even think or imagine all of these things. But trying to understand this is complicated. I'm here to only just provide a few, you know, some of my thoughts and my solution, which a lot of conspiracies and profits and companies, you know, there's no way to really get around it. You know, for example, if the military is out there spending money on ridiculous things like $100 pens and $1 million desks and, you know, all this money is being funneled by these large corporations, how do you stop that? That kind of stuff is difficult to stop. You can't stop paying the military or stop paying taxes. But, well, you can, but you know what I'm saying. But when it comes to pharmaceuticals, there is something we can do. Not only can we choose not to take the easy way out and just take a pill because our doctor says so, but educate one another. Educate fellow parents and teachers on these things. You know, some states had to pass laws that prevented schools from forcing parents to put their kids on drugs. And like my wife said, when she saw that, she said, how could they force kids to take drugs anyway? And that was my thought. You know, what the hell is going on here? We're creating a generation of zombies. And it's really going to bite us in the ass. And it's all in the sake of profit. The largest money makers, the medical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and it's really disgusting. So what can we do about it? We can choose not to partake in these things, but also, if you know a parent who has their kids on these things or is considering it, it's one of those things where a lot of people bite their tongue. If another parent decides, if you're having a conversation with some other parent and they say, yeah, my teacher's telling somebody to put my kid on Ritalin, which actually that happened to me the other day. Somebody was mentioning that, and I said, don't do it. Don't do it. It's ludicrous. You know, it depends on the kid. You know, if you're questioning whether it's the right thing or not, then obviously you're, you're doing the right thing, but I'm not here to tell you that your kid's not crazy and bouncing off the walls. I don't know that situation. It would be irresponsible of me to say that every individual shouldn't take these things. But it's my belief that the human condition is complicated, human nature is complicated, and the damage that can be done by these drugs is far more than the damage that can be done by an overly hyperactive kid. But in some circumstances, I don't know. I believe taking amphetamines for any child is child abuse, tantamount to child abuse. Especially since these things have not been proven scientifically to have any efficacy on brain chemistry, nor are they shown to have any long-term benefits. Only short-term gain by lazy parents who want to give their kid a pill so they don't have to be real parents. And that's how I feel about it. So, all thoughts are welcome, of course. I'm sure somebody will be highly offended by that, but tough shit. If you're giving your kid pills, especially when they're only 3, 4, 5 years old, you know, hey, I've got kids. I've got a 6-year-old who throws tantrums and slams doors and the next minute he's laughing. Does that mean he's bipolar? No. It means he's fucking 6 years old. So, anyhow, I'll talk to y'all later, and have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself.